In August 1991, the Formula One circus arrived at Spa-Francorchamps for the 11th round of the 1991 Formula One season. And in practice, a young 22-year-old German, Michael Schumacher, would announce his arrival in the sport and stun Formula One by outpacing his much more experienced teammate Andrea de Cesaris. Schumacher substituting for Bertrand Gachot, who was unable to race that weekend because he was serving a 2-month prison sentence in an English jail as a result of, well, let's just say an altercation with a taxi driver in London. Schumacher had received the call up to Jordan after impressing in his initial laps of testing at Silverstone, where the team and engineers would recount that Schumacher was immediately on the pace, immediately comfortable and confident in the car. So Jordan, turning up at Spa-Francorchamps that year, already with the media spotlight firmly on them, would find themselves under the glare of the media's cameras throughout the weekend, in no small part due to the stunning seismic shock that Schumacher's performance sent through the field. Schumacher had never driven the track before. He had only ever been there as a spectator. On that weekend, Andrea de Cesaris was meant to show Schumacher the track, help him understand how to navigate it. But he was held up with contract negotiations, so Schumacher was left to learn the track on his own, cycling around the track, taking a fold-up bike he brought with him. He impressed the paddock by qualifying 7th. That was after de Cesaris, not quite sure how Schumacher had outpaced him in practice, had swapped chassis, convinced there must have been something wrong with his car. But there was nothing wrong with the car. His problem was that he had been saddled with what would now become, as history would tell us, one of the most amazing, most mercurial, most innately talented drivers to ever grace the sport. And while Schumacher's race would end on lap 1 with clutch problems, his performance had so impressed the Formula One paddock that by the time the circus turned up for the next race at Monza, Michael Schumacher was a contracted Benetton driver. This was despite the fact that Jordan had an agreement in principle between himself, his team, Jordan, and Schumacher's Mercedes management team that should have seen the German race for the Irish team for the remainder of that 1991 season. Instead, Schumacher was engaged by Benetton Ford for that very next race. And although Eddie Jordan would apply for an injunction in the British court trying to prevent Schumacher driving for Benetton, he lost that case because they had not yet signed a final contract. And in that moment, the die was set. In only his second race in Formula One, Schumacher would finish 5th at the Italian Grand Prix, finishing ahead of his teammate and 3-time world champion, Nelson Piquet. Out of the 6 races that Schumacher would contest for Benetton in 1991, he would end the season with 4 points. In the following season, 1992, Schumacher in his conventional B192 would take the challenge to Nigel Mansell and Riccardo Patrese in the FW14B, which at the time, with its Renault engines and semi-automatic gearbox featuring active ride suspension, was one of the most advanced, most technologically astounding Formula One cars to ever grace the sport. When the Formula One circus arrived at the Mexican Grand Prix, little did they know that by the time the checkered flag fell, Michael Schumacher would take his first Grand Prix podium, finishing in 3rd place. However, the young German, who would become the Meister to many in Formula One, would take that achievement and eclipse it when the circus arrived again at Spa-Francorchamps for the Belgium Grand Prix. In a wet race, Schumacher would confound the Formula One paddock yet again by taking his first Formula One victory in only his 2nd year in Formula One. As astounding as that victory was, Schumacher had signaled to the field that a victory was soon to be coming. At the 7th round of the 1992 season, the Canadian Grand Prix at Montreal, Schumacher had qualified in 5th position, starting behind Ayrton Senna on the pole for McLaren Honda, Riccardo Patrese, Nigel Mansell starting 2nd and 3rd for Williams Renault, and Gerhard Berger for McLaren Honda in 4th place. Schumacher would line up on row 3 next to Johnny Herbert starting for Lotus Ford. As the green flag fell, Senna would take the lead ahead of the two Williams Renaults of Mansell, who had got ahead of Patrese, then followed by Berger, Schumacher, Herbert in his Lotus Ford, and Martin Brundle, Schumacher's teammate. For the first 13 laps of the race, the top 8 would circulate, following each other in close attention. However, on lap 14, Mansell would make an overtake attempt on Senna at the last chicane, but his car would end up off the track with him spinning out of the race on the main straight. Mansell was out of the race and would accuse Senna, who would be accused not for the first or last time in Formula One, of pushing his opponent off the track. Whilst this altercation was taking place, Berger had passed Patrese. McLaren were now leading the race first and second. On the 18th lap of the race, Ivan Capelli would crash into the wall, exiting turn 4. Johnny Herbert would then retire on lap 34 with clutch problems, and his teammate, Mika Hakkinen, would retire 1 lap later, his gearbox failing to make it to the end of the race. Having survived his coming together with Mansell earlier in the race, Senna would be forced to retire on lap 37 with electrical problems, which meant Berger was now leading the race by just over 2 seconds ahead of Riccardo Patrese, who was being chased by Martin Brundle, who had taken advantage of Schumacher, who got stuck behind Gianni Morbidelli's Minardi whilst trying to lap him. A few laps later though, Patrese was also out of the race, his gearbox too failing under the strain of the race at Montreal. This made it the first double retirement for Williams in 1992. Brundle was now left to chase after Gerhard Berger, a chase that would end prematurely when his transmission would too fail, his 5th and final retirement of the season in 1992. This gave Berger a clear run to the checkered flag, where he would take the victory 12.4 seconds ahead of a fast-charging Michael Schumacher in second place for Benetton Ford. To put into context just how amazing Schumacher's season was, whilst Mansell would be crowned champion with 108 points, ahead of Patrese on 56, Schumacher would finish in third, just 3 points behind Patrese. And that was in a Benetton B192 that everybody in the paddock recognised was in no way a match for the FW14B. But extracting a superlative performance out of a race car would become Schumacher's trademark. It was something that the German was renowned for. In 1994, a season that was marred by tragedy with the deaths of both Roland Ratzenberger and Ayrton Senna at the San Marino Grand Prix. A season in which Michael Schumacher and his Benetton team would be under constant scrutiny and a cloud of controversy as they were accused, or suspected at least, of having hidden electronics in the car that were capable of exploiting the ban on traction control. That and the 2-race ban that Schumacher was served with for failing to serve a black flag after passing Damon Hill on the formation lap for the British Grand Prix. Let alone the season-ending clash between Hill and Schumacher at the Australian Grand Prix at Adelaide that would see the German crowned Formula One world champion. No, it was that season's Spanish Grand Prix at the Circuit de Catalunya in Barcelona, where Schumacher would find himself stuck in 5th gear after encountering the fault during the first round of pit stops. The fact that Schumacher was able to continue setting respectable and competitive times, finishing second having started on the pole, is why Flavio Briatore considers it his greatest ever F1 drive. But Schumacher would give us many great drives, none more so than when the track was at its wettest. Lauded as the rain meister throughout his career, Schumacher had this innate ability to search out the grip and instantly find it. What many will remember from the Belgian Grand Prix of 1998 is that Damon Hill won, Ralf Schumacher finished second for Jordan's first victory in first 1-2 of Formula One. They might even remember the chaos that started the race when David Coulthard would lose control of his McLaren, causing the race to be red flagged due to the carnage that ensued. Many more will remember the collision between Michael Schumacher and David Coulthard that resulted in the German accusing the Scotsman of trying to kill him. But it was what had preceded that collision that so typified the mercurial talent that was Schumacher. Schumacher had put on an absolute masterclass after the race restarted behind the safety car. Overtaking Hill, who was leading, Schumacher had put a 40-second lead on the field. Ironically, many believed if he had been a little slower, he may have avoided the collision itself. But like many greats before him, Being conservative was not part of Schumacher's makeup. From that very first race for Jordan in 1991 through to his final race at the Brazilian Grand Prix in 2012, Schumacher would give us memories. Schumacher would set a standard for Formula One drivers for generations to come.